Calcutta, June 20th, 1756. It happened again. The EIC stepped over the line, and the local Indian ruler, in this case the Nawab of Bengal, has responded by capturing another British fort in another factory city. And just like the siege of Bombay, the Indians hope to make an example of the EIC. So the Nawab's men strip the surviving British soldiers naked and lock them in the fort's prison, a 14 by 18-foot room referred to as the Black Hole. British survivors claim that 146 prisoners were crammed inside at the same time, and were held there, suffocating until the next morning. When the prison door was opened, only 23 men remained alive. Given the EIC's history in India, the story of the Black Hole of Calcutta is a familiar disaster. Yet what makes this instance different was the British response, a response that would fundamentally alter the power in the subcontinent and send the Mughal Empire down the long road to ruin. Thanks so much to Ting Mobile for helping this historic tale come through loud and clear. After barely surviving the 17th century in India, in the 18th century, the British recovered a bit, managing to hold on to their coastal factories, the most important of which included Bombay in the west, Madras in the south, and Calcutta in the east. There, they generated a few million pounds of revenue each year through the exports of textiles, sugar, indigo, pepper, and saltpeter. However, much of this revenue was eaten up by the high expenses associated with combative trade located halfway across the world. So to compete with the VOC and other European trading companies, the EIC began to adopt a militarized corporate structure and built a fleet of East Indiamen sailing ships that combined speed, storage, and heavy armaments. This impressive fleet was supplemented with small armies made up of local mercenary soldiers trained in European style called sepoys.
Okay, so they got the money, they got the ships, they got the soldiers. This is where the conquering starts, right?
Well, not exactly. You see, even here, with this success, we run the risk of jumping to the conclusion without considering the context. Remember, at the beginning of the 18th century, the Mughal Empire's power was still at its zenith, holding sway over the subcontinent with armies that numbered in the tens of thousands. Also, we can't forget that the British at the time were still just one of many European states in the area. Case in point, consider the French, who entered the subcontinent scene at the end of the 17th century. At this moment in history, France is arguably the most powerful nation in Europe, but had a lot of catching up to do in terms of colonialism. Yet by the 1730s, the French, through their company the CIO, maintained revenues on par with the EIC despite being in India for less than half the time as the British. So how did Britain go from being the underdogs to a foregone conclusion? Well, under the rule of Emperor Aurangzeb, the Mughal Empire reached its greatest size and strength, a state that stood shoulder to shoulder with the greatest empires the Western world had to offer. But it had one fatal flaw, which was hard to see in the 1700s because it was also the empire's greatest strength.
And here come the paradoxes, right?
Ding, 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 ding! Now you're getting it, Army! Aurangzeb and his ancestors built the Mughal Empire in a way very similar to the Mongol Empire from which they emerged. In this system, the Mughal emperors delegated much of the day-to-day rule over their huge empire to various local potentates, while they maintained control over big questions like trade and foreign policy. The emperor would then provide military force and basic infrastructure to local leaders in return for consistent tribute payments, nearly always drawn from taxes on land. And those land taxes were the secret sauce of the Mughal Empire. Thanks to a huge population of cultivators paying taxes every year, the Mughal emperors possessed a constant and often expansive stream of cash. So, what could mess up this reliable system that's been doing quite well for the Mughals for a couple of centuries? Oh, hi European trading companies and privateered armies! Didn't see you there. These new corporate armies weren't interested in taking on the Mughal Empire. It was just too big and strong. Their main purpose was to protect European factories from other Europeans. But when they weren't busy fighting folks from their neck of the woods, these corporate armies were often rented out as fighting forces to local Indian leaders to make some extra coin. And these corporate sepoy armies offered a lot of advantages for local potentates. They were stationed close to their fiefdoms, made up of local troops that knew the land, and could be used without having to ask for help from the Mughal emperor. I mean, why travel all the way to the Mughal brick-and-mortar mercenary store when you could use EIC Prime with 2-day Soldier of Fortune free shipping? What could go wrong? Now, the Mughal Empire might have been okay with this situation had they maintained their strength at a continental level. However, in 1707, Emperor Aurangzeb died and was replaced by a successive chain of ineffective leaders. This period led to a series of small wars between rival local rulers that in centuries past would have been snuffed early by a strong Mughal emperor re-establishing order. But that didn't happen in the early 18th century. And gradually, over a period that went on decades, local leaders began only paying lip service to the emperor while they formalized their own independent rule. A rule that was built upon European-trained mercenary armies. By the 1740s, it was clear that this situation would eventually spell doom for the Mughal Empire. But what was funny was that the European companies that were indirectly involved in this destabilization of the Mughal state weren't completely aware of their newfound power. Because from the perspective of the Dutch, the French, and the English, the main enemy was still each other. In fact, the thought of taking over for the Mughals only occurred by happenstance in Bengal. By the mid-18th century, Bengal had become the most important region in the subcontinent for the EIC, because it made up 75% of all of the EIC's exports and possessed abundant natural resources, a huge labor market, and a sophisticated merchant class. Consequentially, the British were incredibly eager to protect this golden goose, and they did so by building up their military forces and defenses in the region. The purpose of this military buildup was to protect the region for the EIC from the French. But in 1756, the Nawab of Bengal, Suraj-ud-Dowlah, objected to this because it risked war between two foreign armies in his homeland. After the Nawab expressed his displeasure, the French agreed to draw down their forces. But the British, fearing the French, decided to continue their work. So the Nawab responded by laying siege to the EIC factory of Calcutta, which led to the famous Black Hole incident. Now, in decades past, the British would have taken the L and asked for forgiveness. But the story of the Black Hole became fodder for sensationalist retellings throughout British India and Britain itself. And with each new version, the Black Hole became darker and holier. For the British, responding to this incident wasn't about exerting control, it was about serving out justice. An EIC force was dispatched from Madras in 1757 under the command of Colonel Robert Clive. Upon arriving in Bengal, this force was bolstered by men and funds supplied by local merchantmen who valued their relationship with the EIC and were eager to see the Nawab not only punished for the Black Hole, but removed. And on June 23, 1757, just over a year after the whole hole incident, Clive's numerically inferior but well-disciplined force defeated the army of the Nawab of Bengal at the Battle of Plassey. A week later, the Nawab was executed and replaced by a series of new Nawabs that the British hoped would funnel funds their way. Eventually, however, these new leaders bristled at the EIC's incessant demands for cash, and in 1764, the then Nawab of Bengal, Mir Qasim, allied with the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II to try to oust the EIC from the province for good. But the company decisively defeated this combined force at the Battle of Buxar. Then, fearing that this defeat would lead to the collapse of his empire, and hoping to secure British protection, Shah Alam II offered the EIC the most valuable thing in his kingdom, the Diwani, the right to be the emperor's official revenue collector in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. In this way, the EIC went from being one of many companies clinging to the subcontinent to being the first European landlords in India. And it's at this point that we'll ask you all to put your anthropomorphic armchairs in their full and upright positions, because things are about to get rough. Okay, maybe we were phoning it in a bit with that last armchair joke, but what better way to do a seamless transition into talking about our friends at the new and improved Ting Mobile? See what I did there? High five! No? Okay, moving on. What we love about Ting is it's got a plan that can work for anybody on any budget. For instance, if you just need unlimited talk and text, then they've got you covered for only $10 a month. Or depending on your data needs, Ting has plans starting at $25 all the way to the mighty unlimited talk, text, and data for just $45, meaning there's a perfect plan for you and your family. And speaking of families, it's that time again, Jeff. Since you switched to Ting 8 months ago, how much have you saved on your fam's 2 phones and an iPad? Over $620? Dang, that's really gonna help out with your holiday shopping this year. P.S. I think you already know what I want. What's really neat, though, is that the only thing that actually changes is you getting a lower monthly phone bill. You still get robust nationwide LTE and 5G coverage, not to mention access to Ting's award-winning customer service, plus no contracts ever. And switching has never been simpler. Just head to extracredits.ting.com to check your phone's compatibility, create an account, and pick the plan that's right for you. Not to mention, if you bring your phone, you'll get a $25 service credit to try Ting with no strings attached. And because using our link, again that's extracredits.ting.com, helps support the shows you love while biting off a big chunk of your phone bill, there really has never been a better time to try Ting for yourself. Thanks so much. That's right, Zoe. Ahmed Ziad Turk, Alicia Bramble, Casey Mustia, Dominic Valenciana, Joseph Blame, Kyle Murgatroyd, and O'Reels1 are fantastic legendary patrons.